Yo, what's going on GameLeap? It's Coach Eagz back again, and I'm excited as ever to bring you our ultimate ANIVIA guide. Now, I know why you're here. You want to abuse ANIVIA for some LP games because she's pretty busted right now, and hey, I don't blame you. So in just the next 15 minutes or so, we will cover everything you need to know about the Cryo Phoenix. Abilities, tips and tricks, combos, playstyle, runes and builds. And for our question of the video, we want to know what brought you to playing ANIVIA in the first place. I actually played ANIVIA way back in Season 2 because of one game Froggen had against Moscow 5, and his team was down almost 30,000 gold and came back to win on the back of his ANIVIA. Boy, those were the days. Now, before we start sending it, remember to head on over to our red hot website, GameLeap.com, join thousands of other summoners to get an advantage on the competition by gaining access to our hundreds of challenger courses and guides. Links will be in the description and comment section. Okay, so let's start with abilities and ANIVIA's passive, Rebirth. So your passive is up every 4 minutes, regardless of cooldown reduction, and when it is active, instead of getting a grey screen, you become ANIVIA, so you transform into an egg. Now, after 6 seconds, if the enemy champions haven't killed your egg, you are reborn with the same percentage of health that your egg had left. Now, you cannot act while you're in egg form, but you can use teleport, so if you die to a gank early game, quickly teleport out of there. In a straight up 1v1 though, your passive makes you very hard to kill early game, so it's important to constantly look for trades in the laning phase. If you Siebes looking at your HUD to check if your passive is up, you can look above your level number next to your health bar. If you see a pair of wings above that number, your egg is at the ready. Moving on to your Q, Flash Frost, and this ability makes or breaks your early laning phase, so pay attention here. So when you press Q for 80 to 100 mana, you launch a big chunk of ice that flies towards the target location, dealing magic damage to enemies it passes through, slowing them and chilling them, which is very important, and we'll elaborate on this in just a minute. Now, you can also recast your Q, and this detonates the ice, dealing magic damage to enemies within its radius and stuns them. Now, if you don't recast your Q, it will detonate at max range. It's important to note here that when the blast hits an enemy champion, it deals both the pass-through damage and the detonation damage. This is why it's critical to land these early game. Best time to use this, you ask? Like any skill shot, it's easiest to hit when the enemy champion is focused on something else, like CSing. So try to time your Q when your opponent is about to go for a last hit. Against melee champions, you won't even have to use it because the threat of you dealing a ton of damage and stunning them is too high, so don't feel as if you have to throw this out on the reg. While it's good to know how to use your Flash Frost offensively, you also have to recognize that without it, you are a lot more vulnerable. The slow and stun protect you, it keeps enemies at arm's length, but if we don't have it and we continue to play aggressively, we are inviting damage and potential death. If you were to do this against a Fizz, for instance, one of your biggest counters, what's there stopping him from jumping on your face and killing you? Now, when you try to flash Q, your Q starts from the location you originally casted it from. Now, it looks pointless to do it, but there are a couple of situations you might consider it. An enemy champion might be out of range of your E, so you could Q flash over a wall or structure in front of you to get in range. Only do this though if that target is already CC'd, because it's still easy to dodge your Q. It would also be useful if you were trying to run away, so you can Q that champion as they engage on you and flash at the same time to evade that deadly crowd control and initiation. Now, before we move on to our next ability, guys, please smash that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our Season 11 related uploads. Next up, we have your W, Crystallize, and this is one of the coolest abilities in the game. For 70 mana, when you press W, you summon an impenetrable wall of ice that blocks all movement and displaces units off its initial spawn. Now, your wall lasts for 5 seconds, and if you use it in fog, it grants vision of that area. Now, some other cool tips. You can trap blue buff in its area, allowing you to take it without taking any damage. You can also trap champions against terrain with your W, so when they are against a wall or structure, you can drop your wall right on top of them and they won't be able to move. Everyone will be question marking the play as well because they can't believe you are that skilled on a NIV, so always look for these opportunities. Your wall also grants assists if an enemy champion touches it before dying, so if you get to a fight and the enemy champion is about to die, try clip them with your wall for some free gold. Now, if you time your Crystallize perfectly, champions cannot pass through at mid-dash. Think of a Tristana jump. When she channels her W and you time yours as she takes off, you will stop her in her tracks. This is incredibly useful to know, so make a mental note of that one. Crystallize can also stop Maokai saplings and Elisa's volatile spiraling in their tracks, and if you really wanted to get fancy, you could always displace one of your minions with your wall so the sapling or spiraling detonated into that instead. Because of your wall, you have some amazing synergy with Gnar, Poppy, even Vayne. So if you see one of these on your team, ANIVIA makes them even better. Now, your wall can be used both aggressively and defensively. So when you want to catch up to your opponent, your Crystallize can stop them and allow you to gap close. This is especially useful when your jungler or a teammate ganks. You can also use it to trap an enemy in your Glacial Storm, and we'll get into some of these combos soon. On the defensive side of things, your W, if timed and placed correctly, can push away enemy champions that are giving you the old headbutt and save your bacon. It can also be used in skirmishes and teamfights, especially in the jungle, to block off certain areas from which enemy champions can flank and get to your backline. Think of a Kha'Zix, for example. Now after your W, we have your E, Frostbite, and this is your main source of damage and has a flat 4-second cooldown, which is nuts, so you have to know how this works. Now when you press E, you spend 50 mana to blast that target with a freezing wind, dealing magic damage. Now listen up. If that target was hit by Flash Frost or a fully formed Glacial Storm, Frostbite deals 200% damage, so it doubles. So at level 2, when you have your Q and E, you always want to E as or after your Q hits an enemy champion, otherwise you're missing out on a huge amount of damage. Also, when you have your ultimate, you ideally want to wait for it to enlarge before throwing out your E for the same reason. Now later in a game, when you have a lot of ability haste, your E can be on close to a 2-second cooldown, especially if you opt for Liandry's Anguish as your mythic. So when you have a lot of ability haste, you can actually lead with your E and have another Frostbite ready to go in no time at all. In the early game though, this is suboptimal, so keep that in mind. Now we have your ultimate, Glacial Storm, and the 1025 changes right made to your ult make it, well, arguably one of the most powerful ults in the game. You call forth a driving rain of ice and hail, dealing magic damage per second to all enemies within the radius while also slowing their movement speed. The blizzard increases in size over 1.5 seconds, and at maximum size, enemies within the area take 300% damage and suffer a 50% stronger slow. You can toggle your Glacial Storm off after 1 second by pressing R again, but there is a cooldown. At 1 rank, this is 4 seconds, at 2 ranks, this is 2.5 seconds, and at 3 ranks, level 16, this is where you really shine because it is on a 1 second cooldown. This means you pretty much have permanent access to your ultimate, and it can completely dismantle the enemy team in teamfights. It's important to know that your ultimate deactivates if you are more than 1,000 range away or you run out of mana, of course. Also, Glacial Storm is deactivated by all forms of interrupting crowd control. So knockups, silences, stuns, stasises like Bard's ultimate. Hope that's a word, by the way. So how should you use your Glacial Storm? Well, one of the big strengths your ultimate has is it clearing minion waves. Early in a game, it's effective to shove in your wave and roam or recall, and later in a game when the enemy team is threatening to take your towers, you can clear their incoming minions and halt their progress by simply pressing R. Now make sure to deactivate it because you will burn through mana quickly. You can also use it to zone the enemy champion from the CS, and this is most achievable when they are under their turret trying to farm. Think of a Galio for instance. If you place your Glacial Storm between the turret and your minions, he has to choose whether to face tank all your damage or give other minions and therefore gold. Your R is also great to keep you or your teammates safe when being chased. You can just place your Storm on top of the enemy champions to slow them down, or you could also place it on yourself to discourage them from initiating onto you. This is a very useful tactic indeed. Now in late game teamfights, your ultimate is a big cuck to any champion that relies on mobility, and almost all of the time these will be the enemy carries. Whether it's an assassin like Akali or AD carry like Vayne, your slow from Glacial Storm diminishes their progress and effectiveness in a fight. The only real downside when you use Glacial Storm is the mana cost. Casting it costs 60 mana off the bat and another 35 to 55 mana per second when you have it active. Now this is most pertinent in the early game when you don't have mana items and a big enough mana pool to not worry about that blue stuff. You should never run yourself dry unless you can hard push a minion wave before the enemy laner returns to lane. Let me put it this way, if there is a threat of you dying from being do not use your R like it's going out of fashion. Preserve your mana best so you can use your other spells, they are important. For the next part of the guide guys, we are going to talk about your playstyle as ANIVIA, and this is the most important part of the guide, so listen up, and we'll get into all the fun and essential combos you must know in just a minute. So let's talk about your early game. You have the second highest basic attack range of all the mid laners at 600, Annie's is 625, so it's very important for you to get used to this distance so you can harass your lane opponent without chance of them retaliating. It's also crucial to use your auto attacks to keep the wave away from your tower. As ANIVIA, you are one of the worst farmers under towers, and as you all know, CS matters. So if you notice the enemy minion wave threatening to crash into your tower, trim the wave by auto attacking the cannon minion first, then the melee minions, then the ranged minions. Otherwise you will be banging your head against the wall. Also, when the lane is being played outside of your tower range, the enemy mid laner is in a really dangerous position. Your jungler can gank for sure, but why is it especially risky for them to push up against you as ANIVIA? Because you have setup. Good. You have your slow and stun and your flash frost and your wall to stop them from escaping. Now, we talked earlier about using your Q deliberately, and I want to bring this point up again because this will save you from dying. When you are playing against an assassin, it can be a melee one like Fizz or a range one like LeBlanc, save your Q for their gap closer. If you throw out your Q when a Fizz has his E up or a LeBlanc with a W up and you miss, guess what? You have to blow flash or worse, you die. You need to wait for the enemy mid laner to make that first move so you maximize your chances of landing your Q. Without it, you are a sitting duck. Now, before level 6, your roaming potential is very weak compared to other mid laners. Again, let's think of these highly picked assassins like Zed and Akali. So until that power spike, you want to be farming best you can, and when they go to roam, you shove your mid wave in. When you hit level 6, this changes. You have my permission to perma-shove and then roam. Now, the reason for this is because with your ultimate, you actually offer a lot in 2v2 skirmishes and teamfights. Let's think about mid to late game. As you scale and become a late game weapon, it is all about control. You can try to catch enemy champions with your wall, you can zone a whole team with your ultimate, you can peel for your ADC if they're not already 0-10, but the key to all this is not dying and headbutting the enemy team. Stay at range and barrage the enemy champions with endless Frostbites and your Glacial Storm. Now, as ANIVIA, you are a combo mage, meaning that you excel when you use your abilities with one another. So let's get into the combos you have to know about. First one, the Q and instant E combo. Now, it sounds basic, but the point here is that you are throwing out your E immediately after you Q. Can you see here how my E deals double the damage just as my Q reaches the target? The reason this works is because your Frostbite's damage is calculated once it hits the target, not as you cast it. So if your Q hits an enemy champion while your E is mid-air, the double damage procs. Notice how the damage doesn't proc if I throw my E out first. So what's the benefit of doing this? Well, it gives the enemy less time to react, it's just more efficient. Now, the next combo you have to master is the QWE combo. So you lead with your Q, and to make sure it lands, you can use your wall to move the enemy champion into your Q's path, like I'm doing here. Then you just follow up with an E. Now, one of the keys to this is to throw your Q where the enemy champion is at the exact time you press Q. If you overpredict, they will be too far away for your displacement to matter. So throw it straight at them and react on the fly when you place your wall. If they run below your Q's path, you crystallize below them. If they walk above your Q's path, you crystallize above them. The great thing about the new ANIVIA is that even if your Q clips the enemy champion and you almost guarantee it with this combo, your Frostbite doubles in damage. Just be careful using this early game though, because it can cost you around 200 mana, which is a big 40% of your total mana. Now, it might look simple, but it is actually a difficult mechanic to master, so get your head and hands in that practice tool. The last combo we're going to go over is the RWQE combo. So you place your R on the enemy champion, or so it just touches them if you are at max range, and you W behind them so they are stuck or forced into your Glacial Storm. Now, when they are in the storm, smart players will know you want to land your Q, so will try to juke you by faking to walk below the wall, only to then change their pathing and move above it. So be patient and get close to them. The closer you are, the less time they have to react, and most of the time they will end up out-juking themselves and dying to your storm anyway. You can throw your E out as soon as your Q clips them, or when your ultimate is fully formed after 1.5 seconds. Now, this combo is great during the laning phase, especially against immobile champions like Orianna and Twisted Fate. Like the QWE combo though, use this sparingly. You can burn through mana using it as soon as your cooldowns are back up again, when maybe you should just be chilling and preserving your mana for that upcoming dragon fight. Also, be careful using this against assassins because again, when your Q and W are on cooldown, you are easy access. Now let's smash through the builds, runes and skill order you have to be using on ANIVIA. Now, there are two setups I'm going to recommend. The first one is the utility setup. When you're against champions that you are going to trade with early on but are unlikely to kill like Victor, Galio, Xerath, start with Corrupting Potion and take Phase Rush and the rest of these runes on screen now. This is all about maximizing your trading potential and sustain. You have mobility through Phase Rush, you have Scorch for a bit of extra early game damage, you have Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter for sustain, and you have attack speed in your minor runes to throw out auto attacks during trades and to also control the minion wave at the same time. Wheel Summoner spells take Flash and Teleport. Cleanse is also an option though if you're against hard CC compositions, especially if the enemy mid and jungler pose a big threat like a Syndra and Lee Sin for example. Now, the other early game route is the aggressive setup, and you should take this when you think you can have kill pressure on your opponent. Think of all those Assassins and Lucian and Jace players you come up against. These are very squishy, and because you have the range advantage, you have more of a chance of piling the pressure on them and creating kill potential. So start Doran's Ring and take Electrocute in your runes with the others shown on screen now. Electrocute gives you that extra burst, and Taste of Blood gives you sustain you need during fights as we talked about, but you can also choose Cheap Shot if your team has a lot of crowd control or if you're confident in landing your own CC. Take Flash and either Ignite or Cleanse depending on how much crowd control their team composition packs. Now let's get into the rest of your items. The first few items you buy should always include a tear, boots, and then sorcerer shoes, and then lost chapter. Now if you're opting for the utility setup, build your chapter into either Luden's Tempest or Everfrost. Luden's and Everfrost give you utility, and that's the theme of this setup. Your damage is already high as ANIVIA, and in some games having more movement speed or peel for yourself is way more valuable. If you're choosing the aggressive setup where you're after kills and more kills, build your lost chapter into Liandry's Anguish. The burn gives you amazing damage over time, especially with your ultimate, and the cooldown mythic passive gives you ability haste on each legendary item, which is also great. You can still go Luden's or Everfrost, but Liandry's screams damage, and that's what we're after. For either build, you then want to upgrade your tier to Archangel's Staff and then Azonia's Hourglass or Banshee's Veil. Now if you're feeling vulnerable, then you can always rush either of this before completing Archangels. Your last two items, you can choose to buy any of the following depending on what the enemy team composition is and what they are building. First up, you have Rabadon's Death Cap, and this should always be your first choice if the enemy team composition is squishy and are building little to no magic resist. This item makes you hit like a truck, and because of your already high base damage, this amplifies that beyond belief. Now it does cost 3,800 gold, which is a hefty amount, but it's fully worth it, especially if you're snowballing because you can buy it a lot sooner. Next up, there's Void Staff, which is 2,500 gold, and you want to build this if the enemy team, especially their carries, have lots of magic resist. Maybe they have a more of Malmortius or Mercurial Scimitar. It's important to have enough magic penetration to smash through that resistance. Third option you have is Demonic Embrace. If the enemy team is tanky and has a lot of health, build this. The passive is ideal for shredding through the beef of the enemy team and works great with a consistent damage in your Glacial Storm. Last option you have is Morellonomicon. Now if the enemy team has a ton of healing like Silas, Sirach, or Olaf, this item is perfect, but make sure you finish it last. The main reason you opt for Morello's is for its Grievous Wounds, and you get this from Oblivion Orb, which is only 800 gold. So upgrade your other items first, then finish Morello's. For skill order, always start Q, then put 2 points in E, W at level 4, then max out Frostbite, followed by Flash Frost, then Crystallize. Be sure to put a point in your ultimate at level 6, 11, and 16. Guys, I hope this video gave you an insight on how to play ANIVIA. If you enjoyed it, let us know by leaving a like down below. And again, do yourselves a favor and head over to our elite website, GameLeap.com. If you want to become a Challenger player, it's the only resource you need. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Coach Eagz, and until next time, peace.